Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I never suspected anything until that night. It was late, and I was clearing out some old emails when I stumbled upon something that sent a chill down my spine. It was an email from a BDSM club, addressed to my husband. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a spam or an accidental subscription. But curiosity got the best of me. I clicked on it, and that's when my entire world turned upside down. His messages were clear. He'd been involved with this club for months, maybe longer. There were plans for meetings, mentions of other members, even discussions about upcoming underground parties. He never once mentioned any of this to me. The shock was overwhelming. I had no idea what to think or how to feel. It felt like my entire marriage had been a lie. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to dig deeper, but I felt like I was betraying his trust. Still, the truth was more important. I searched through every email, every hidden detail, until I found more incriminating evidence. There were invitations to secret parties, exchanges with members about their preferences, even explicit discussions. The emails were intimate, raw. My heart sank. How could he do this? How could he be participating in these dark activities, while I was left in the dark, believing our marriage was intact? Each message was a dagger, and it hurt even more because I realized just how much he'd hidden from me. My stomach twisted in disbelief and anger. The more I found, the more I became consumed by it. It wasn't just about the parties or the physical acts. It was the emotional connections he had with these strangers. One particular email stood out to me. It was from a woman named Lena. They had been exchanging messages for weeks, talking about their sessions and sharing deep, personal stories. He told her things he'd never shared with me. That hurt more than the physical acts. It felt like he was emotionally invested in someone else. He'd given her the parts of himself I thought I had a monopoly on. How could he betray me like this? I didn't know how to confront him yet. Part of me was terrified of the truth, of what I might find next. But another part of me needed to know. I had to confront him. I couldn't just sit in silence while he continued living this secret life. I waited until one evening when we were alone, and I decided to take the plunge. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. His eyes met mine, and I could see the fear behind them. He knew something was wrong. "About what?" he asked, trying to stay calm. I showed him the emails. "What is this?" I demanded. For a moment, he was silent, his face pale. Then he began to explain. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low. He tried to downplay it, making it seem like it was just something casual, a phase, but I could see through his lies. He was ashamed, but only because he had been caught. He admitted to the parties, the kink, and the emotional affairs, but he insisted it was all just a way to cope with stress. My heart broke as he spoke, each word sinking deeper into my chest. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I was devastated. The man I loved, the man I trusted, had been leading a double life. He had been keeping secrets from me for months, if not years. I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" He looked at me with guilt in his eyes, but didn't have an answer. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said softly. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. He had hurt me more than I could ever have imagined. I felt sick to my stomach. It wasn't just the physical acts that bothered me. It was the deceit, the lies, the fact that he had been emotionally invested in someone else. I was nothing more than a cover for his secret life. Everything we had built together felt like a lie, and I didn't know how to move forward. The days after the confrontation were unbearable. I tried to keep things normal, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who had lied to me, who had betrayed my trust. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had been talking to, Lena. I started searching through his phone and computer, looking for more clues. I found more conversations, more meetings planned. He had been seeing her regularly, attending more secret parties, participating in more kinky activities. He had been living two lives, one with me and one in the shadows, full of secrets and lies. The worst part was that he had used my trust against me. He had manipulated me into believing everything was fine, while he was living out his desires with strangers. I was overwhelmed with emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. How could he do this to me? How could he betray everything we had? I had given him my heart, my trust, and he had shattered it without a second thought. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep his lies ran. He had been going to these parties for years, engaging in things I could never have imagined. He had been involved in these emotional affairs, forming bonds with strangers while I was left behind, clueless. I couldn't help but feel like I had been living a lie. He had used my trust to manipulate me into thinking everything was normal. I felt stupid, humiliated, and broken. The man I thought I knew, the man I had married, was gone, and I didn't know who this new person was. I confronted him again, demanding answers. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. I would have understood. Why keep it a secret? He told me that he had been afraid. Afraid of how I would react, afraid of losing me. But the more he spoke, the more I realized that his fear was just another excuse. He had been hiding this from me because he wanted to keep it for himself. He didn't want to share his dark side, his secret life. He wanted to keep me in the dark, to keep me as the perfect wife while he indulged in his desires elsewhere. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never really known him at all. He had been hiding his true self from me the entire time. As the days passed, I found myself questioning everything. Our marriage, our relationship, our life together. Had it all been a facade? He had been lying to me for so long that I didn't know what was real anymore. Every little thing felt like a betrayal. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, it all felt different now. How could I trust him again? How could I ever go back to the way things were? The thought of him with other people, of him sharing intimate moments with strangers, ate away at me. I felt like a fool. I had been so blind, so naive. The man I had loved had been living in the shadows, participating in a life that I knew nothing about. It was like waking up from a dream, only to find that everything you thought was real was a lie. I started to pull away from him. The distance between us grew, and it felt like I was suffocating in my own home. I couldn't look at him without feeling disgusted. Every time he touched me, it felt wrong. Every time he tried to speak to me, it felt like a lie. He apologized, begged for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't trust him anymore. The man I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And the worst part was that I wasn't sure if he even cared. He had broken my heart, shattered my trust, and yet, he still couldn't fully understand the gravity of what he had done. I wasn't sure if I could ever move past this, if our marriage could ever be repaired. The damage was done. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer the woman I used to be. His betrayal had transformed me into someone unrecognizable, someone full of pain and doubt. The trust one had in him, once so solid and unwavering, was now shattered beyond repair. Every moment with him felt like a reminder of the life we had lost, the intimacy we once shared that now felt like a distant memory. I tried to talk to him, to make sense of it all, but every conversation ended in circles. His excuses, my anger. I began to question everything he had ever said. Had any of it been real? Or had he been living a lie the entire time? One day, after a particularly heated argument, I found myself walking out the door without a destination in mind. I needed to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of the lies. I wandered through the streets aimlessly, trying to clear my head. That's when I bumped into an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We sat and talked for hours, and in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to continue living this lie. I didn't have to stay in a marriage where my heart had been broken so cruelly. I had options. I could walk away. It was a hard thought to process, but I felt the first flicker of hope in a long time. I started to think about my future, a future that didn't involve him. For so long, my life had been wrapped around his lies, around the illusion of our perfect marriage. But now, I could see that I was more than his betrayal. I was a woman with a past, with dreams, with goals. I didn't need him to define me. I began making plans. I'd take time for myself, rediscover who I was without him. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew that I needed space. I started researching therapy, talking to friends, making myself a priority. The thought of moving on felt like both a relief and a weight, but it was the only way forward. The next few weeks were filled with confusion, anger, and a sense of loss. I still had moments where I wanted to reach out to him, to fix things. But deep down, I knew that the man I had married was no longer the man who stood before me. The trust was gone, and without it, what did we have? Every time he tried to apologize, I could feel the distance between us growing. His apologies meant nothing. His words were hollow. They felt like a desperate attempt to make himself feel better, to make up for the years of deceit. But I couldn't erase what had been done. I couldn't forget the pain he had caused. One night, after he begged me to stay, I looked at him and realized something. He wasn't the victim here. I was. I had been the one betrayed, the one left in the dark, the one who had spent years building a life with someone who had never been truthful with me. I wasn't sure if I would ever forgive him, but in that moment, I knew that I had to forgive myself. I had to stop blaming myself for his actions, for my own inability to see the truth. I had trusted him, and while that trust had been broken, it didn't mean I was weak. I was strong enough to survive this. I was strong enough to rebuild. I began to distance myself more and more. I started to spend more time with friends, focusing on my own needs. Slowly but surely, I found the strength to let go. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in sadness and anger, but there were also moments of clarity. I realized I didn't need him. I was capable of creating a life for myself, a life filled with honesty and love, a life free of the shadows he had cast. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to start over. I had learned the hard way that trust is something that can't be rebuilt overnight. I took the time to rebuild my own self-worth, something that had been completely shattered by his actions. I sought therapy, not only to deal with the trauma but to rediscover who I was without him. It was empowering, slowly peeling away the layers of doubt and insecurity he had instilled in me. I realized that I had been too focused on him, on trying to make him happy, to keep him satisfied, to keep him close. I had neglected myself in the process. Now, it was my turn to heal, to rebuild what he had broken. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I was strong enough to do it. As time went on, I became more and more certain that leaving him was the right decision. Every day, I grew stronger. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it became manageable. I learned to smile again, to laugh, to find joy in the small moments. I found myself again. I rediscovered my passions, my interests, my sense of self. I realized that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was whole on my own. It was a liberating feeling, one I had long forgotten, and the more I embraced it, the more I realized that I deserved better. I deserved honesty, respect, and love, not lies and betrayal. One evening, I ran into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop. We chatted for a while, catching up on life. There was a warmth in his smile that made me feel alive again. It was nothing serious, just a pleasant conversation, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was life after all of this. Maybe there was love again, somewhere out there. I didn't know what the future held, but I no longer feared it. The thought of starting over didn't scare me anymore. In fact, it excited me. I was ready for whatever came next. The days felt lighter now. I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. I started a new routine, one that didn't involve him. I joined a yoga class, took cooking lessons, and spent more time with my friends. It was like I was discovering the world again. But this time, for myself. There were still moments when I missed the life we had, but I knew I could never go back. Not to the lies, not to the betrayal. Slowly, I learned to enjoy my own company. I began to feel like myself again, the person I had been before the storm hit. I had my own dreams, my own desires, and I was starting to remember how to chase them. One evening, he came over to my apartment. He was different, more subdued, less arrogant. He seemed to realize that things had irrevocably changed. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I did and for how I hurt you." His words weren't new. They were the same ones he had said countless times before. But this time, there was something in his eyes, guilt, regret, maybe even a hint of fear. I listened quietly, my heart no longer yearning for his words. I had already heard them too many times. They meant nothing to me now. "I've moved on," I said, cutting him off. "And I think you should too." The finality in my voice left no room for discussion. He left that night without another word. I started to heal in ways I never thought possible. I traveled more, explored new places, and discovered parts of myself that had been buried for years. I learned to appreciate the beauty of solitude, the peace that came with it. I could finally breathe without feeling like I was drowning in his lies. The more I grew, the more I realized that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was whole on my own. I wasn't looking for validation from anyone, especially not from him. I had become the person I was meant to be, and it felt like freedom. There was a part of me that still wondered about him, how he was coping, if he was still attending those parties, still involved with the people he had betrayed me for. But those thoughts were fleeting. They no longer consumed me. I had my own life to live now. I refused to let his actions continue to define my happiness. For the first time in a long while, I felt empowered. I was in control of my own story, and nothing he did or didn't do could take that away from me. I was moving forward, and nothing was going to hold me back. I met someone new, someone who made me laugh, someone who treated me with kindness and respect. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a fresh start. I felt the spark of something new, something that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. We spent time talking, getting to know each other. There was no rush. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of opening my heart. I didn't know where it would lead, but I wasn't scared of the possibility anymore. I had learned to trust myself again, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and the man I had once loved seemed like a distant memory. I had let go of the anger, the hurt, and the resentment. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was for me. It was about releasing myself from the chains of his lies. I had carried the weight of his betrayal for so long, but now it was gone. I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to. I no longer let his actions hold power over me. It felt like a weight lifted off my chest, and I could finally breathe freely again. Life had changed in ways I never could have predicted. I was stronger than I had ever been, more resilient, more self-aware. I had come to understand that the journey I had taken wasn't just about surviving his betrayal. It was about discovering who I truly was. I had been lost in his world, in his lies, but now I was finally free. I had reclaimed my life, and I would never again let anyone take that from me. I was proud of who I had become, proud of the woman who had emerged from the ashes of my broken marriage. One day, I ran into him again. He looked different, tired, worn down, like he had been living with the weight of his actions. "I hope you're happy," he said quietly. I could see the regret in his eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. "I am," I replied, my voice steady. "I've learned to be happy without you." There was no anger, no bitterness in my words, just a simple truth. I had moved on. He wasn't the man I once knew, and I wasn't the woman who had loved him. We had both changed, and there was no going back. We parted ways that day, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. My new life continued to unfold, each day bringing new possibilities. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, who helped me grow. I had found my tribe, a group of friends who understood the pain I had endured and celebrated the strength I had found. They helped me believe in myself again, in my worth, in my ability to love and be loved. I was finally living a life that was mine, and it was more beautiful than I could have imagined. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. As time passed, I stopped looking back. The past was a distant memory, a chapter that had closed. I had let go of the anger, the pain, the shame. I was no longer defined by his betrayal. I was a new woman, strong, confident, and full of life. I had built something new, something beautiful, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had learned to trust again, but this time, it was with myself. I knew I was capable of handling whatever came my way. Looking back now, I see the journey I've taken. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but I've emerged stronger, wiser, and more at peace with myself than I ever thought possible. I've learned that true happiness comes from within, that I don't need anyone else to define my worth. I am enough, just as I am. And while the scars from the past may remain, they are no longer a source of pain. They are a reminder of how far I've come, of the strength I've found, and of the woman I've become. The future is mine, and I'm ready to embrace it.